as we address the subject enforcing the Sharia in the modern age. This is a follow-up lecture to one that was delivered last Sunday at Masjid Al-Ghufran in Tamantun, Dr. Ismail. And that was entitled, "To What Destination is Ikhwan al-Muslimun taking Egypt?" As we speak today, the referendum is taking place in Egypt on the acceptance of a constitution, at the heart of which is located the enforcement of the Sharia in Egypt. And tonight's lecture is a follow-up to that lecture. However, that lecture cannot be made public until it is broadcast on Egyptian television. Only after it is broadcast on Egyptian television, only then can we put it on YouTube for everyone to see it. We hope, inshallah, in the same way that we had an excellent recording for that lecture, since we have Ice Maker here tonight, we'll have another excellent recording tonight, inshallah. The Sharia is a law. It is a law or a legal system which has come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not a human, man-made law, come from Allah. But it's a law which is extended with human effort from the original core which was revealed by Allah. Did Allah send down one law for all mankind? No. No, He did not. We quoted from Surah Al-Rum, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, لِكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا مِنْكُمْ شِرْعَةً وَمِنْهَاجًا. To each of you, we have ordained a law and a way. Meaning He did not create us all as one people. No. Inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha. We created you from a single male and a single female. Our father Adam alayhi salam and our mother Hawa alayhi salam. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلًا. And we ordained that you should emerge as different nations and different tribes, speaking different languages, eating different food, wearing different clothing. So there is diversity amongst mankind as there is diversity of flowers in the garden. And that diversity is meant to enhance the splendor of Allah's creation. Except that insofar as human beings are concerned, He says, لِتَعَارَفُوا. That this diversity amongst mankind is meant to function as a means by which you recognize each other and a source of knowledge and wisdom for you. Not that you should be rivaling with each other. Oh, I am Malay, so I am superior. No, I am Chinese, so I am superior. No, I am Indian, so I am superior. No, I am Arab, so I am superior. No. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. Classification of superiority and inferiority is not based on the colors and the size and the tongue you speak, but based on what is in the heart. The piety, the character, the integrity in the heart. And so Allah did not send down one law. He said, لِكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا مِنْكُمْ شِرْعَةً وَمِنْهَاجًا. We send down different Sharia for different people. And the Sharia which was sent for us is not to be imposed on others. Oh no! You do not enforce the Sharia of Islam on a Christian or on a Jew. Not at all. But the Sharia which has come, وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ جَعَلَكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدًا. If Allah had so wished, He could have created you all as one community. But He has not done that. No. So there are different Sharia for different people. It is another subject that sometimes Allah cancels a law and it becomes mansukh. But we have discussed this subject in previous lectures. We will not deal with it tonight. Enforcing the Sharia means enforcing something which is timeless, which doesn't change. What Allah has made halal is eternally halal. And what Allah has made haram is eternally haram. So the enforcement of the Sharia is something which is eternal. Well, then why the modern age? Is there something new, something strange, something different about the modern age that we ought to understand? That we should do our homework first before we announce, as Ikhwan al-Muslimun has announced in Egypt, that we are enforcing the Sharia. What is there about the modern age? Well, let us go to Surah At-Tawbah, Surah number 9 of the Quran, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down this revelation. اتخذوا أحبارهم ورهبانهم أربابا من دون الله. That they took their priests and their rabbis as Lord and God beside Allah. Oh, worshipping your priest instead of Allah? Worshipping your rabbi instead of Allah? That's terrible. وَالْمَسِيحَ ابْنَ مَرْيَمَ. And they did the same thing with the Messiah, the son of Mary, worshipping him instead of Allah. وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا يَعْبُدُوا إِلَهًا وَاحِدًا. But they had not been ordered other than to worship one God. لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا هُ. There is no God beside him. Subhanahu. Glory be to him. عَمَّا يُشْرِكُونَ. Far removed is he from this shirk. Oh, that's a terrible word. Shirk. Why is it so terrible? Allah says, tell my servants, if they come to me with sins as high as the sky, I'll forgive them all. Inna Allah yaghfiru dhunuba jami'a. Allah is prepared to forgive all sins, but not shirk. The one sin He will not forgive if you die with that sin. Oh, it's a terrible sin. Shirk. And if you worship the priest and the rabbi as God beside Allah, you commit shirk. So a man came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, O Messenger of Allah, the Christians do not worship their priests. The Jews do not worship their allies, their rabbis. How could Allah say so? Good question, eh? To which the Prophet replied. And he said, did they not make halal what Allah made haram? That is their shirk. So to make halal what Allah made haram, or to make haram what Allah made halal, is shirk. And did the people not accept it and follow them in it? That is their shirk. And so the first thing about the Sharia if you are to enforce the Sharia, is that there must be no law above the Sharia. What Allah has made halal must be preserved as halal. No one must have the authority to make it haram. No one. So there can be no law above the Sharia. I think that is something easy for Ikhwan al-Muslimun to answer, to understand. If you can understand it here in Sungai Bulu, why can't they understand it in Egypt? Is it possible today, my dear Ikhwan al-Muslimun, is it possible to enforce the Sharia in Egypt as the supreme law? Is it possible? No, not at all. As they say in Malay, tak boleh. Why? Because this is the modern age. And in the modern age, you now have something called the United Nations Organization. Have you ever heard about it? Ikhwan? And the United Nations Organization has a charter, the Charter of the UN. And the charter gives to the Security Council of the United Nations supreme authority in the world on all matters pertaining to war and peace and security, international peace and security, and they will define what is peace and security. You can't define it. So if Allah in the Quran gives a command and the Security Council gives a different command, which one will prevail? Come on, Ikhwan, answer me. This is Sharia. That is the Charter of the United Nations. When you become a member state of the United Nations, you accede to the Charter. And you therefore voluntarily accept that you will obey the Security Council of the United Nations, regardless of whether the order of the Security Council is in conflict with the Sharia or not. So it is not possible to escape from the conclusion that international law prevails over the Sharia in the modern world. Well then, what do we need to enforce the Sharia? You need to have a territory which recognizes Allah's sovereignty, and in which therefore there will be no law above Allah's law. What was this territory called in the past? Whatever be the name, it's not important. But it was called Darul Islam. It was called Darul Islam. So long as you remain a modern state and a member state of the United Nations Organization, your attempt to enforce the Sharia can only be cosmetic. And that is an insult to Allah and to His Messenger. It's better not to put your hand in that pot rather than to make it into something that is unpalatable for Muslims. Yes. Is it possible to restore Darul Islam today? If you want to restore Darul Islam today, you must have the military power to be able to take on all the forces in the world today which are ranged against Islam. Do you have that power? Do you have that power? About 20 years ago, in 1990, the Security Council of the United Nations wanted to adopt a resolution permitting the use of force against Saddam Hussein's Iraq. This is the first war in Iraq. And China was a member of the Security Council. And so was Yemen, so was Cuba. And so was Malaysia. When the resolution came to vote, I think maybe Cuba and Yemen voted no, and China probably abstained. All the Malay people in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in Singapore, in Brunei, were all supporting Saddam. All of them. Malaysian government voted in favor of the resolution. Dr. Mahathir explained. He said, if we had voted against, or if we had abstained, they would have destroyed our economy. He was brutally honest and frank. Brutally honest and frank, Dr. Mahathir. You could not survive economically if you cross the line. So do you have the military power to stand up to them when you don't even have the economic power? Huh? You can't continue to live in the comfort zone and stand up against them. No. You cannot restore Darul Islam today unless you restore the Khilafah. Tell me, unless the Zionists appoint your Khalifa for you, which they probably will do in Libya, and when they take over Syria, they do it in Syria. Unless the Zionists appoint the Khalifa, and the Zionists say this is Khilafah, or the Zionists choose an Imam al-Mahdi and present him to us, that's the only way you can get Khilafah. You're living in dreamland if you believe you have the power today to restore the Khilafah. The Khilafah can only be restored, in my opinion, because I have studied ilmu akhirul zaman. When Imam al-Mahdi comes, not before. And that may be another 20, 25 years from now. Not only do you have international law preventing you from enforcing the Sharia, you have more than that. You have your national laws. If you make halal what Allah made haram, what you're doing is legalizing that which is haram, making it legal. So my question to Ikhwan al-Muslimun tonight, did Allah make haram the lending of money on interest? Yes or no? Don't ask Al-Azhar University. That's the last place in the world you want guidance from on this matter. Don't ask Al-Azhar University. Did Allah make the lending of money on interest halal or haram? Answer, haram. Is money being lent on interest today in Egypt? Do you have banks in Egypt? Come on, answer me. Yeah, you do. If you enforce the Sharia, will you still allow the banks to lend money on interest? Or will you have to stop them? You cannot enforce the Sharia and still have your banking system lending money on interest, because then the whole world will laugh at you. What are the implications, therefore, of shutting down the banking industry, banking system? Have you ever thought about it, Ikhwan? Because if you allow money to be lent on interest, I believe you have banks in Malaysia as well, do you?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
And Malaysian banks, they lend money on interest, do they?
Total Islamic banking, non-Islamic banking.
So it is legal, right? It is not against the law. It is in conformity with the law.
Yes.
So you have made halal what Allah made haram.
It's for the kafir.
You made halal what Allah made haram. And that is shirk. This is being recorded. And therefore you're committing shirk. Not just Malaysia, around the world of Islam. So this is part of the problem of enforcing the Sharia in the modern age. You'll have to deal with banking. You'll have to deal with banking. You'll have to deal with membership in the United Nations organization. But that's not all. There's something called the International Monetary Fund. And all countries in the world have to be members of the International Monetary Fund. And if you are like Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, and you recognize it to be evil and exploitative, and you want to withdraw, the conditions of withdrawal are so terrible that Venezuela cannot withdraw. Yeah. It will be financially disastrous for Venezuela to withdraw. That's what you are. The whole world of Islam today is in the International Monetary Fund. Good. What are the implications of membership in the International Monetary Fund? And what are the implications of enforcement of the Sharia in a member state of the IMF? Number one, even Dr. Mahathir was not aware. No, he wasn't aware. Question: has Allah made dinar and dirham halal? Yes or no? You better say yes, because dinar is in the Quran. Whether you are aware of it or you are not. I don't know if Ikhwan al-Muslimun is aware of it. I have to raise my voice because it's not just anger, it's pain in my heart that Ikhwan has taken Egypt to civil war today because of recklessness on their part. Recklessness. Egypt is now in civil war. People are fighting each other in the masjid. In the masjid. In Salatul Jum'ah. Because of the recklessness of Ikhwan al-Muslimun. Dinar is in the Quran. Dirham is in the Quran. And a dinar in the Quran is not made of paper. It's made of gold. And a dirham is made of silver. Allah made it halal. It is also sunnah. All prophets of Allah use dinar and dirham. And tomorrow, Israel will be using dinar and dirham as money. And shame, shame, shame on the ummah of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. Shame, shame, shame on the scholars of Islam when Israel starts using dinar and dirham tomorrow. Shame on the muftis, shame on you. May Allah take me away from the world. I don't want to live to see that day, because the shame and the disgrace will be too great for me. But may Allah keep them alive to see that day. Those who today would not lift even a little finger to bring back dinar and dirham as money. Keep them alive and take us away from the world so we don't have to face that shame and disgrace. Allah made it halal. Dinar and dirham as money. What did the IMF do? Even Dr. Mahathir was not aware. The Articles of Agreement of the International Monetary Fund has prohibited the use of gold as money. Haram. So they have made haram what Allah made halal. Is that shirk? You better answer that question before you reach your grave, eh? Yeah. And if you follow it and accept it, and you say that the money which comes out of the IMF, which is the ringgit, the paper ringgit that you have, came out of the IMF, that this is halal money, you also part of the shirk. This is not the time. I have a lecture outside entitled Islam and the International Monetary System. You can get it outside, the video, or you can go on the internet and you can listen to it. I have a book entitled The Gold Dinar and Silver Dirham, Islam and the Future of Money. You can read that book. We have it in bahasa as well, outside. And I have a lecture which I just delivered at the conference on riba a week and a half ago on Islam, the petrodollar and beyond, which explains the subject in greater detail. That lecture is also on my website, so we don't have the time to explain. If you want to enforce the Sharia, you'll have to withdraw from the IMF. Huh? You'll have to withdraw from the IMF. Why? Because the IMF articles of agreement prohibit the use of gold as money. And therefore they have made haram what Allah made halal. But that's not all. There's more to it than that. In the Quran, Allah has prohibited ripping off people. 3 times in the Quran He has said, وَلَا تَبْخَسُوا النَّاسَ أَشْيَاءَهُمْ. Don't rip off people. How do you rip them off? By diminishing the value of what they have. Their property, their wage, their belongings. As the value of your money falls, everything else is falling. I am a writer. I earn my livelihood, alhamdulillah, from my books, so nobody can fire me. So I have the freedom to speak. I published Jerusalem in the Quran, which is my bestseller, in 2002, so 10 years ago, right here in Malaysia. And at that time we fixed the price at 35 ringgits. And I could have sold 4 copies and bought a dinar 10 years ago. Did you hear that? Good. After 10 years, we raised the price from 35 to 40. But now I have to sell about 25 copies to buy 1 dinar. Do you understand what has happened to your ringgit? I sold 4 copies, I could buy 1 ringgit. 1 dinar. 4 copies, I could buy 1 dinar. 10 years later, increase the price to 40, I have to sell about 20-25 copies to buy 1 dinar. That's where your ringgit is, falling in value. And your case is not as bad as Indonesia. It's not as bad as Pakistan. It's not as bad as Bangladesh. It's not as bad as Egypt. As the value of the paper money falls, the people become poorer and poorer. Money that Allah created doesn't fall in value, because the value of the money is in the money. It has intrinsic value. That's why the IMF prohibited the use of gold as money. Why? Because they want you to be imprisoned with this paper money. They used to have paper and printing press and ink to create money. That's all you needed to create money. You need paper, you need a printing press, and you need ink. And you could make money out of thin air. Who is Imran Hosein to say that? Oh, Imran Hosein has studied international monetary economics, so he knows what he's talking about. Oh yes, he knows the subject. They don't teach the subject in the Darul Ulum, international monetary economics. No. And that's why our muftis give fatwa without a knowledge of the subject. In 1971, the United States reneged on its obligations under international law to redeem US dollars for gold. And from that day to this day, it's only paper. When they print their paper, it's called hard currency. So you can have a US dollar anywhere in the world. You could go Indonesia, you could go Bandung, you could buy what you want with US dollars. So it's very advantageous for them to print paper and buy all the oil in Saudi Arabia. It doesn't cost anything except the paper and the ink. But when we print paper, we the donkeys, because we are donkeys, we have a load of books on our backs. كَمَثَلِ الْحِمَارِ يَحْمِلُ أَصْفَارًا, says Allah. Donkeys with a load of books on our backs. We print the paper. And we go to Manhattan, Midtown, Lower Manhattan where you have Wall Street. And we take a whole suitcase filled with Bangladeshi taka. Can't even buy a cup of coffee. That's why we are donkeys. If you can't understand that this is bogus and fraudulent and haram, you should buy a one-way ticket and go to the moon. But Bank Negara will never say that it's bogus and haram. And the muftis will never say it's bogus and haram. But Dr. Mahathir explained something to us recently. And remember, Dr. Mahathir is not an alim. He's a politician. He's a secular politician. He's a nationalist. He's not an ustaz. No, he's not an alim. And he pointed out they don't need to print paper anymore. He says all that the Federal Reserve has to do now, and only the Federal Reserve can do it, no other central bank can do it, is write a check for $7 trillion. $7 trillion. And just send the check to the banking system. And that enters into the books of the banks. And when the bank lends the money to you, Egypt, IMF loan, and you sign the agreement for the loan, now it becomes money. Now it becomes money. So they are creating money out of thin air, but a much faster rate than they did it with printing paper. Because imagine, says Dr. Mahathir, how many security vehicles you will need to take $7 trillion? How many printing press will have to print for how many months to print $7 trillion? Now it's easy, you just write a check. And then when the bank lends the money, it's not going to be lending $7 trillion, you know. It's something called, what is it called?
Fractionalized banking.
Fractional reserve banking. That term came straight out of Jahannam. Fractional reserve. We might have a banker here who would agree with me. Meaning, you take the money which is created out of thin air and you multiply it several times. If I have 100 ringgits, I'm a bank, I can lend 1,000 or more. Called fractional reserve banking. So this is bogus upon bogus, fraudulent upon fraudulent, haram upon haram. If you want to enforce the Sharia in Egypt, Ikhwan al-Muslimun, what's going to happen to the Egyptian pound? Did you even ask the question? before you went to your referendum? The Egyptian pound is bogus, it's fraudulent, it's haram. And it has functioned as a vehicle for the economic exploitation and financial enslavement of Egypt. There are so many considerations to study if you want to enforce the Sharia in the modern age. We have a little time left for me to turn to another aspect of the subject. Namely, do we have the scholarship today, the Islamic scholarship, to enforce the Sharia in such a way that it will display its absolute superiority over every rival system of law? Or are we going to enforce the Sharia today and the world will look at us and make us a laughing stock of mankind? Tomorrow, when there is Sharia in Egypt, what happens when the Israeli Mossad pays an Egyptian family to bring a little girl 6 years of age, she's a child, 6 years of age, to the Sharia court for permission for nikah with a man who is 55? Sharia court will have to decide, is it halal, is it jaiz for a nikah to be conducted with a child, a girl who is 6 years of age? Sahih Bukhari says, Sahih Bukhari, that Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha said that Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam married me when I was 6. Let's leave the consummation part. We are concerned with marriage, nikah. If this is true, then it becomes sunnah. If this is true, it becomes sunnah. How many of you here in this masjid will be willing to follow the sunnah? Why are you so scared? If it is the sunnah, you should be proud to marry a 6-year-old child. Is this all the reason we have? Is this what Allah gave to us? Just 5 ringgits worth of intelligence? Which one of you will marry a 6-year-old child? Which one? But no, you accept the hadith because it's Sahih Bukhari. Do we have the Islamic scholarship today to be able to study and see whether this hadith is in conformity and harmony with the Quran or in conflict with the Quran? And do we have the courage and the integrity today in Islamic scholarship, when we recognize a hadith to be in conflict with the Quran, to say the Quran must prevail, not the hadith? Well, I am saying to you, this hadith is in conflict with the Quran. Oh yes. And if you want to marry a girl who is 6 years of age, then CNN will capture it on Al Jazeera, and it will be broadcast on every television station in the world, again and again and again and again. And we Muslims become the laughing stock of the world. When I said this to Dr. Mahathir, he said to me, we are already the laughing stock of the world. That's the answer he gave to me. I said, Dr. Mahathir, can I quote you on that? He said, yes, you can quote me. That's not all. What will we do when the Israeli Mossad pays 2 people who are married, not to each other, to come before the Sharia court in Egypt and to confess to zina. The court will have to decide what is the Sharia punishment. And in the hadith, it is stated, Sahih Bukhari, that the punishment for zina, if you are married, is rajam, stoning to death. Okay? So the court will have, if it follows that hadith in Sahih Bukhari, the court will have to pronounce rajam. This is going to come to Egypt tomorrow. Don't be surprised when it happens. The Mossad is probably waiting for it. And then when you stone these two people to death, you will be sure to have CNN there and Al Jazeera there. And they will record it and they'll play it over and over and over again in every single television station in the world. We will not then be the laughing stock of mankind. We'll be worse than that. Mankind will despise us. Israel will win a propaganda victory against Islam unlike anything they've ever won before. Is this hadith in conflict with the Quran, or is it in harmony with the Quran? Do we have the caliber of Islamic scholarship today to be able to recognize a fabricated hadith because it is in conflict with the Quran? This subject is called naskh. We don't have the time to deal with it tonight, but I do have a lecture on my website and on YouTube entitled The Punishment for Adultery in the Religion of Abraham alayhi salam, in which I have argued the case that that hadith is fabricated. And the punishment for adultery, whether you are married or unmarried, in the Sharia which came to Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, is a public flogging. And so we ask the question, when we enforce the Sharia today, do we have that caliber of Islamic scholarship with which to be able to apply the Sharia in such a way that we will demonstrate its superiority over every rival system of law in the world? If you do not have an Islamic scholarship that can even recognize paper money as bogus and fraudulent and haram, how will you deal with fabricated hadith? We have something called Islamic banking, which is supposed to be the alternative to riba. And we are so proud, mashallah, we have Islamic banking. But Islamic banking is using the same paper money. No Islamic bank in the world dares, none. They don't dare to open their mouth to say anything about paper money. They don't dare to do it. That's your Islamic banking. They will not lift even a little finger. Your former Prime Minister of this country recognizes the bogus monetary system, but not your banking system, not your central bank. He has a better understanding than even Kelantan today. And this is not an Islamic scholar. No, a politician. Is it not embarrassing? Because I have studied monetary economics. I know the subject. And I recognize that he has a superior understanding than all the ulama. I consider that embarrassing. In order for us to enforce the Sharia, we have to ensure that we have that caliber of Islamic scholarship which can apply the Sharia in a way that will dazzle mankind. The brilliance of the Sharia. I got an email from an American lawyer. She's a woman. She practices somewhere in Los Angeles or San Francisco somewhere. She wrote to me. She's been practicing law for about 20 years or more now. And she specializes, maybe she might even be listening to this lecture. She specializes in divorce law. And she wrote to me. She said, "Your religion is so beautiful." Your religion is so beautiful. When I looked at the law of divorce in Islam and the law of marriage in Islam, it is so superior to this mess that we have today. She says, "I know the mess because I have to be handling these divorce cases." They recognize that their system is so deficient. They recognize that ours is so beautiful. We must have the caliber of scholarship to be able to display that beauty to mankind and convince them of the superiority of the Sharia. We have time for one last comment before we have the azan. But after the salat, we'll have a question and answer session. Don't mind my comment. There's something called a secular educational system. University education. And those who go through the secular educational system become secularized in their thinking. They are not prepared to submit to Sharia. No. Lots of them in Egypt today are of the view that religion and politics must be kept separate from each other. Religion and law must be kept separate from religion. And religion actually now belongs to the museum. Keep your religion in your masjid. Don't bring your religion in the affairs of the public. So they oppose Sharia, sacred law. And then there are others who recognize, yes, we are Muslims. This is our Lord from Allah. But we don't trust the ulama that they'll be able to apply this law properly. So what do we do? Are you going to enforce the Sharia? Are you going to enforce the Sharia on a people who are not prepared to accept it? Our view is that you will enforce the Sharia only on those who are willing to submit to it, not on the others. But you enforce the Sharia, you apply it in such a way, with such beauty, that they will be drawn to it gradually, on their own will, rather than enforce it upon them. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين آمين. There is a difference between the macro enforcement of Sharia and the micro enforcement of Sharia. From the time you say you are enforcing Sharia in a land, that's macro. And you therefore have to deal with the problems I raised in my lecture today. But if the macro is not possible, because that banking system out there is too powerful, we can't shut it down. You're living in dreamland if you think you can shut down that banking system. You're living in dreamland. If the macro is not possible, then we say the micro is still possible. And the micro does not pretend that we are enforcing Sharia. No. The micro is that we are practicing Sharia to the extent that it is possible for us at the micro level. And we say that that can better be accomplished in small communities, not big, and outside of the cities. So there you have my Muslim kampung. For our listening audience outside, kampung means village. A remotely located Muslim village with a small population, comprised of people who want the Sharia. No one objects. So there is no need to force it upon you. We all want Sharia. We'll have to organize ourselves as a jama'ah. And to be a jama'ah, you have to have an amir. And you have to give the pledge to obey the amir. And when you give that pledge, you must keep it. If you break that pledge, out you go. The Amir will then enforce the deen on the members of the Jama'ah. The Amir will have a shura for consultation. And so this is not one-man dictatorship. Now, through a process of consultation, Allah says, وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَ بَيْنَهُمْ. He says, وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. Through a process of consultation, the Amir will conduct the affairs of the Jama'ah. Even with this limited application of the Sharia, there will be no banks. Not in our Muslim village. Out, we don't want you. Even with this limited enforcement of the Sharia, we will not be using ringgit. No. We will use dinar and dirham in our micro market. And if there is a shortage of dinar and dirham in the market in Medina, what would they do? What money would they use? 100 years ago, even a schoolboy would answer that question. Schoolboy. Today, 100 years later, knowledge has fled, and ignorance is so profound, it's like the fog in Los Angeles. Nobody can answer that question today. Korma. If there was a shortage of gold and silver coins in the market in Medina, they would use korma, dates, as money. For some people, that's a shock. Oh my gosh, can you actually use dates as money? They've lost 1400 years of their history. Vanished, gone, because of modern education. The hadith is gold for gold if a transaction involves an exchange of gold for gold, or silver for silver, or wheat for wheat, or barley for barley, or dates for dates, or salt for salt. Once it is like for like, it must be equal for equal. And it must be hand to hand. A cash transaction cannot be credit. Credit haram. If it's not, it's riba, said Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. What is common to all six, 2 precious metals and 4 commodities of food consumption, is that they all use as money. all used as money in the market. So, by analogy, if we are in Java and we have a shortage of dinar and dirham, we'll use rice as money, not nasi, baras. Is it? Baras is called? Baras. And if you're in Cuba, Fidel Castro's Cuba, and you have a shortage of gold and silver, you will use sugar, gula, money. Okay? So already in the secular educated fellow with a PhD from MIT, he won't be able to understand this. So just leave him by himself. Yeah, leave him with his PhD from MIT. But the rest of us will understand that this is money which intrinsic value, not money which is determined by George Soros. You know him? And they can change the value of money as they want. Yeah. And as the value of money falls, they make a killing. And the massive transfer of wealth from the unsuspecting masses to a global, predatory, blood-sucking elite, growing ever richer, while the rest of us become imprisoned in permanent poverty. This is the micro solution. And this is a solution that I suggest we can work with. If we had the ulama on our side, yes, we could do something. But we don't have the ulama. When last did you hear an alim say that this paper money is haram? Huh? Until you get ulama to study international monetary economics, and until you can get ulama with backbone, like we used to have, courageous men who would stand up courageously, as we had in our history, and proclaim the truth regardless of consequences. Oh, those were men. Until such time, we can do nothing better than the micro solution. Any other questions? If you are not clear, it's simple for me to repeat it. Hadith says one thing, Quran says another. Okay? Hadith is Sahih Bukhari. It says that the punishment for zina, if you are married, is rajam. And if you are unmarried, it is flogging, which is in the Quran. I did not dwell on this because this is a different subject on naskh, which will take time. But I said to you, I have a lecture on the punishment for adultery in the religion of Ibrahim alayhi salam, which is on my website, which is on YouTube. You can listen to that lecture. The hadith begins like this. Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu says, and I was in the classroom of tafsir, and sometimes you doze away in the classroom, fall asleep. Especially when the teacher is an old man and he's chewing something called pan in the classroom. So I was falling asleep, and we were dealing with Suratul Nur. But then I woke up suddenly when I heard that Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu is saying, people would say, we no longer find the ayah on rajam in the Quran. So let me explain to you. And then he goes on to say, this is the punishment if you are unmarried, and this is the punishment if you are married. So I woke up. I said, oh, there used to be a verse in the Quran, and it's no longer there now. What utter rubbish is this? I've never heard more nonsense. I can't say that to the teacher. You get thrown out of the classroom. But I'm saying to myself, this is a tremendous amount of rubbish I'm hearing here. I'm 20, 23, 24 years of age. that there used to be a verse of the Quran in the Quran, it's no longer in the Quran today. So all the sleep evaporated and I wake up. When the class was over, I went to the office of my teacher, Maulana Dr. Muhammad Fadlur Rahman Ansari, and mashallah we have his book, 2 volumes, The Quranic Foundations and Structure of Muslim Society, which is outside. I brought only 3 copies with me today. I said to him, Maulana, this is what they just told me in the classroom. That this is Sahih Bukhari saying that there used to be this verse in the Quran on Rajam, it's no longer there. Maulana said to me, son, they're wrong. No verse of the Quran, none, has been forgotten or cancelled or abrogated. None. Cancellation and abrogation and verses being forgotten refers to revelation which came before the Quran, about which Allah says in Surah Al-Baqarah, مَا نَنْسَخْ مِنْ آيَةٍ أَوْ نُنْسِهَا نَأْتِ بِخَيْرٍ مِنْهَا أَوْ مِثْلِهَا, that we do not cause any ayah to be cancelled, to be abrogated, or to be forgotten. سَنُقْرِئُكَ فَلَا تَنْسَى إِلَّا مَا شَاءَ اللَّهُ سَنُقْرِئُكَ فَلَا تَنْسَى إِلَّا مَا شَاءَ اللَّهُ. No verse of the Quran, we do not cause any verse, any ayah to be cancelled, abrogated, or forgotten. But we replace it with that which is better or similar. This is known as the ayah of naskh. So he said, this refers to revelations before the Quran. If any verse in the Quran is cancelled, it's abrogated, it's no longer in the Quran, it used to be there. It is Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, he is the only one authorized to say. No one else. Only Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. And he never said about any single verse of the Quran, not one, cancelled, abrogated. Huh? So this hadith in Sahih Bukhari begins with this statement, which is utterly wrong. It's fabricated, that there used to be a verse of the Quran on Rajab. It's no longer in the Quran now. The question is, what do you do when there is a statement in the hadith, even if it's sahih, which is in conflict with the Quran? What is the relationship between the Quran and the hadith? Our answer is that only the Quran is divinely protected. Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikra wa inna lahu lahafidhun. So only the Quran has absolute authenticity. Only the Quran. Nothing else but the Quran has absolute authenticity, meaning authenticity guaranteed by Allah Himself. Therefore, the hadith does not have the same status as the Quran. No. What is the relationship between the Quran and the hadith? Answer: the Quran sits in judgment over the hadith, not vice versa. So we take the Quran to sit in judgment over this hadith. And the verdict of the Quran is that the punishment for zina is flogging. The previous punishment in the Torah was rajam. That is now mansukh, cancelled, abrogated, and replaced with a new Sharia in the Quran. Like the Qibla. The old Qibla was Jerusalem. Although many people choose Washington as their Qibla. If Washington says stand up, they stand up. Washington says sit down, they sit down. And when Washington says that the legitimate government of Syria is this band of terrorists armed with Saudi weapons and Qatari weapons and Turkish weapons and NATO weapons and paid by these Zionists, this is the government of Syria. They will all, because the Qibla in Washington, recognize it. They'll all recognize this government as the government of Syria. You'll see, coming soon, maybe December 21st, they said, the world is going to end. Huh? So look, December 21st, see maybe some big false flag chemical attack in Syria, and then NATO launches the attack because they say Assad has used chemical weapons here. And the donkeys will accept that. NATO always speaks the truth. The donkeys will say. Yeah. So, the principle involved is that the Quran sits in judgment over the Hadith, and if there is a conflict between Quran and Hadith, it is the Quran which must prevail, not the Hadith. And so we say that this is a fabricated Hadith. Any other questions? I have a book at the back which is a bestseller, Jerusalem in the Quran. It's translated into Bahasa. You can read it in Bahasa. Okay? You have to study the subject of the Holy Land, Jerusalem, Israel, through ilmu akhiruz zaman. When you do that study, then you'll be introduced to Ya'juj and Ma'juj. Nobody teaches that subject now. Have you ever heard a lecture on Ya'juj and Ma'juj? Never. And you'll be introduced to the subject of Al-Masih al-Dajjal. It is not so simple. Just going and attacking Israel, no. I gave the lecture on Sunday. Ice Maker here recorded it, and as soon as we get permission from Egypt, it will be made public on YouTube. In that lecture, I explain what I believe is the plan for Gaza. That they're going to attack Gaza time and again, and every time they attack, they want to destroy the most important institutions that they can find, destroy them, to make life more and more unbearable for the people of Gaza. I said, at least follow the Sunnah. The Sunnah is when you are facing an enemy too powerful and you don't have the strength, you make hijrah. If Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam could make hijrah, why can't you? I say, if you do not want to make hijrah, you want to remain Hamas, then at least let the women and children and elderly and handicapped, allow them to leave Gaza. Let them go to Egypt. Egypt is now under the control of Ikhwan. Ikhwan cannot say no. Number two, Hugo Chavez in Venezuela has abolished all visa restrictions for Palestinians. A Palestinian does not need a visa to enter Venezuela. When you enter Venezuela, you can apply for asylum. And Venezuela is a Roman Catholic country, not Muslim. Not Muslim. Okay? I said, what happened to the world of Islam? The world of Islam should abolish all visa requirements for Palestinians. Palestinian Muslim and Palestinian Christian. Don't make any difference between the two. And when a Palestinian Muslim or Christian comes to Malaysia, and they apply for asylum, they should be granted asylum. Means they have permanent residence in Malaysia. Okay? This is what you should be doing. Every surau, every masjid in Malaysia should be organizing yourselves and passing a resolution and sending a message, sending letters, sending representatives to meet with your political representatives and so on, so that the government of Malaysia is faced with a situation where the people of Malaysia are speaking. That Palestinians should be able to enter Malaysia without visa restrictions. Maybe that is already so, I don't know. And when they enter Malaysia, any one of them who want asylum should be allowed to stay. I believe that the long-term plan is that when they judge the moment right, they will attack Gaza with such ferocity, with such brutality, with such wanton destruction, that people will be forced to flee. There's no way you can remain. And then the world will see, in one of the books of the Torah, it's called Exodus. Exodus means everybody fleeing. And it refers to the movement of the Jews out of Egypt, fleeing from Pharaoh to go to the Holy Land. Exodus. So this will be reverse Exodus. The Jews fled that way, the Palestinians flee this way. And Israel will have accomplished what is known as the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. That seems to be the plan. What do? Sit down? Next time they attack Gaza, dropping bombs, killing people, missiles, you sit down and you pass a resolution in this masjid and you make dua? No. You should be responding in a sensible, intelligent way. So we say, before they force Exodus, at least those who want to make hijrah should be allowed to make hijrah. To get out of Gaza, women, children, elderly, handicapped, and others who want to leave, they should be allowed to leave. If you prevent them from leaving, you're wicked. Any more questions? Not just a sin. Not just a sin. Not just. More than that. Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam cursed. He cursed. He cursed all four. And he said they're all equally guilty. The one who takes riba, the one who gives, that pays riba. You borrowed money on interest and you're paying the interest. The Prophet has cursed you. The one who records the transaction, and the two witnesses, said they're all equally guilty. If you have the curse of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam upon you, you can perform your salat, it will not be accepted. You can perform your hajj, it will not be accepted. You can give zakat, it will not be accepted. You can fast in Ramadan, it will not be accepted. Once you have the curse of a prophet upon you, nothing will be accepted. I, by Allah's kindness, studied in 5 universities. I'm a former diplomat in the foreign ministry of my country. Okay? I lived in New York for 10 years. And while I was in New York, I had a very high profile as a scholar of Islam. When I left New York 2 weeks after 9/11, I was driving a car that was worth $500. A few days before my departure, somebody was driving and they hit the back wheel of my car. The cost of repair was more than the value of the car. So I decided to junk the car. But to junk the car, I had to pay $175 for junking. I could have gone to the bank very easily and bought a car with a bank loan and interest. I didn't have to drive a $500 car. $500 in New York for a car is a really very old car. Yeah. That was my choice. So you make a choice. Another time, somebody gave me a car. Buick Electra, big like a house. But you need a gas station for a car like that. So I'm driving to Staten Island and the car overheating. So I left it on the highway, the side, and got a drop. I went and gave my 2 lectures. When I came back for the car in the evening, car not there. Gone. So we went to the police station to report. Police said, we picked up your car and took it to the garage out there. So go to that garage. So I went to the garage took out the carburetor, took out all kind of things from the car. So now if I want this car, I have to pay more than the value of the car. So the idea is for me to leave the car with them. So they said, just sign the transfer form and we'll keep the car. So sign the transfer form. So I'm not, no car. An Italian-American businessman came to see me the next day. He says, your car is gone. He says, allow me, I'm going to pay the lease, a new car for you. Can't have you without a car. All that you have to do is to pay the insurance. A brand new car, he's paying the lease. All I have to do is to pay the insurance. But because it's a brand new car, it's a lease car, you have to take full comprehensive insurance. I said, no thank you. I am not comfortable with insurance. And if I have to take an insurance, it has to be the minimum. So I refused that car. Brand new car. Okay? So we all have choices to make. If you want a house like one that the Prophet lived in, and all his wives, you can build that with bamboo and wood, and you can build it in less than 10,000 ringgits. Or if you want in Damansara Heights for 5 million ringgits, that's your choice. Okay? So we all make our choices. Whether it be a car out there or a house or whatever it is. And Allah will open a way for His servants when He sees in the heart of the servant sincerity, wanting to stay out of riba. Yes. What is that ayah? مَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجٍ. Whosoever fears Allah truly, Allah will open a way for him. مَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجٍ وَيَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ. Any more questions? Yeah. Good, I like that question. The masjid should be the center of guidance. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. He says, it is in the Sunan of Bayhaqi, it is narrated by Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, about Akhiru Zaman. He said, Yushiku ya'ti ala nasi zaman, it will not be long before that time will come. La yabqa min al-Islami illa ismu, when nothing will remain of Islam but the name. Wa la yabqa min al-Qur'ani illa rasman, nothing will remain of the Qur'an but the traces of the writing, mechanically recited. Masajiduhum amiratun wa hiya kharabu min al-huda. The masajid will be grand structures but devoid of huda. A masjid is not a place for only salat. A masjid must be the center of huda, guidance for the people. And then the hadith ends, ulama'uhum, the religious scholars of Islam of that time. ulama'uhum sharrun nasi mimman tahta adimis sama. They would be the worst people beneath the sky. Min indihim takhrujul fitna wa fihim ta'ud. They will be the centers which will corrupt the people. The Imam and the Jama'ah here in the surah, you must set the example. That you buy dirhams. You don't need dinars really, you need dirhams. But be careful. You have some dirhams being sold now, they all have the same weight and they all have the same purity, all of them. It is the cost of minting which differs. Some are being sold for 25 ringgits. I bought 19 ringgits. And if you buy them a single dirham, then that is the price. But if you buy the block, you get it cheaper. So you buy dirhams. The Imam and the Jama'ah will encourage everybody to start buying dirhams, keep dirhams. And then as often as you can, you try to conduct transactions with each other using dirhams. From the time you start doing that, there's something called barakah. A sunnah which was lost is being restored. You have an apartment that you're renting out, and your tenant is paying you rent in ringgits. You say to the tenant, is it possible for us to make an agreement? You pay me in dirhams instead of ringgits. You have a shop in which you are selling goods, and you make it permissible for your people coming to your shop, if they want, they can buy in dirhams. Sultan Masjid in Singapore, and around Sultan Masjid in Singapore there are many shops now which are accepting dirhams in Singapore. So from the surah, the guidance must go up. From the surah, this must be the center of guidance for Sungai Buloh. Any more questions or comments? No more? Then perhaps time for Teh Tarik.